All right, so I've got a full prismatic build here. We're using ergo, we're using stoicism, and I'm using some prismatic ornaments, obviously, in the prismatic subclass. So this video is going to show you how you can solo Rathil in Warlord's Ruin, and this is two-phase damage. I didn't actually pull off the two-phase because I was mainly just doing some testing here, and I did nearly 3 million damage. It was like 2.98 million or something like that in one single phase. That's with a double totem capture, so I think it's about 15 seconds worth of damage with this build, which is very good. I mean, for your average build, if you're just kind of, casual but skilled at the game, and you know how to sort of build your weapon loadout and have a decent build to do damage, you'll be lucky to do a solo 4-phase versus Rathil. And if you're really good and you've put a little bit of thought into your build, a little bit more thought into your build, I should say, then a solo 3-phase is doable. And if you can pull off the solo 2-phase, then you're really kind of min-maxing your build. Obviously there's some world records out there for solo 1-phasing Rathil, but these are world record speedrunners. We're talking like 0.01% or less of the community that can do this type of stuff. And speaking on min-maxing, like we're talking probably like 2-3 loadout swaps, all kinds of menu interactions. This build has zero weapons, zero loadout swaps. We don't have to go into our menu at all, and part of that is because of the exotic class item that I've got here. Now, I know that probably a lot of you do not have access to all of these 1 out of 64 class items, but this is one that I've been hunting down since the beginning, and good friend Chablo91, actually, I think that he said this was his first roll, and he put out a video on it, and I was like, yeah, that is an amazing roll. Shortly after there, I got one, so I wanted to put it to the test. So basically, what this does is Eternal Warrior, essentially, this is one of the spirits from the exotics that we got that is basically better than the actual exotic, right? Because the actual exotic Eternal Warrior, which is like the blue green man helmet, or it's a blue face, but I'm speaking stonemason terms here, which is it looks like a green man. But Eternal Warrior on Arc only works with Fists of Havoc, so it only works on the Arc subclass. It only works with Fists of Havoc, and then you get a 25% arc weapon damage boost for 30 seconds after you pop your super. You also get the damage. You also get a ×4 weapon surge if you get multi kills with arc weapons, right? So the difference between the prismatic version and the the core version of Eternal Warrior is that with prismatic, you still get the 25% weapon damage buff after you pop your super, right? So you don't get the random ×4 weapon surge for getting multi-kills. And obviously, Fists of Havoc is not applicable on prismatic, but I mean, the fact that you can use this with 5 different supers and get and have it work with any different element type of weapon, right? So like if you want to run the throwing axes, which I'm doing here, then you can run void weapons, right? You pop a void super, you get a ×4 void weapon damage buff. If I want to use Thunder Crash, I can get a ×4 arc weapon damage buff, etc. Right? Same with Strand, same with all the subclass, all the elements. It doesn't matter, as long as you match your super with your weapons, you're going to get that 25% extra damage, which is more than triple weapon surge mods on your boot can give you. And while it is only 3% extra, you have to keep in mind that this frees up your loadout so that you do not have to swap loadouts, for one. Like I said, you don't need the surges on your boots, which means that you're free to use survivability mods such as recuperation, such as void scavenger, so you can replenish your ammo faster. You can basically use whatever you want on your boots and not have to worry about surge mods. Also, you don't have to worry about your surges decaying because you get the surges automatically for a total of, I think, 30 seconds, which is insane. That's like having triple armor charge ready to go with time dilation fresh on a damage phase, which is, if you're solo, that can sometimes be tricky unless you're doing loadout swaps, right? So the fact that we don't have to swap loadouts, the fact that we have this buff for 30 seconds, that we have all this freedom to do what we want with our boots, that's actually very good. So I think Eternal Warrior is slept on. A lot of people just look at it and think, well, I can just get basically the same damage buff from running surges, right? But regardless, like I said, we got all these benefits. Also, it means that if you wanted to run 2 different elements of weapons, you could do that. Like, say you want to use Edge Transit, right, with bait and switch. It means that you can run like Witherhoard, which is just always a good option to run with bait and switch weapons. You can stick an enemy with Witherhoard, benefit from triple kinetic weapon surge mods on Witherhoard, while also having ×4 weapon surge mods on Edge Transit, right? So that's another benefit to Eternal Warrior that a lot of people don't talk about. And then I've got the combo here with Star Eater Scales. So, I mean, there's not much to be said here with Star Eater Scales. Again, this is pretty much exactly the same as the core exotic on Hunter, except that we can use it with, we can use it on Titan. And the best super to use it with, arguably the most suitable, is probably the throwing axes, because this is it's a damage super, it's a ranged super. Thunder Crash, yes, we could also benefit from Star Eaters greatly. Same with Glacial Quake. But the thing is, with Thunder Crash, you can just use Curse of the Falling Star, and with Glacial Quake, you can use Syntheseps. But with Twilight Arsenal, basically the only way to improve Twilight Arsenal is with Star Eater Scales, right? And we've got the Seasonal Artifact mod, which gives us Expanding Abyss, so Void sources deal increased damage to weakened targets, right? So the Void Axes weaken the target. It's got, I think it's 70% extra damage from Star Eater Scales, and then all my weapons are doing even more damage afterwards. Not just from Eternal Warrior's 25% extra weapon damage buff, but also from Weaken and also from Expanding Abyss. So a lot going on there as far as damage. So basically this is kind of a max damage type of class item, right? So then we're using Ergo Sum, which is the other, 1 out of 121 roll that you can get here. I've got a Void version with Wolfpack rounds, and this is almost a 5 out of 5, or I guess you would say a 3 out of 3. I've got Jagged Edge. I don't have Sword Masters, but I've got Balance Guard, which is fine. And mainly I'm just using the Wolfpack rounds, right? So you can proc Wolfpack rounds on your own heavy sword with Ergo Sum, right? And then if you've got the Catalyst, you deal, it says dealing damage with the Transcendent Grenades gives you Ergo Sum ammo, right? So that's kind of cool, but mainly I'm just using it to proc Wolfpack rounds so that my Falling Guillotine can do even more damage. So that's the concept there. So Falling Guillotine, this is the max damage Falling Guillotine roll that I farmed for during Into the Light in Onslaught. It is very situational, right? But technically this is the most damage you can get out of this weapon, right? Frenzy is 15% extra damage, so as long as you can be in combat regularly or prior to damage phase starting, then you can have Frenzy right off the bat. And then Surrounded, obviously you need to be surrounded, so this is again situational, even more situational than Frenzy, but with Enhanced Surrounded, I believe it is a 47% damage buff. So 47% with 15%, this is a ton of damage on Falling Guillotine, and I've got Jagged Edge here as well, and yeah, the guard really doesn't really matter that much, but yeah, so we're proccing Wolfpack rounds on this, getting 25% extra damage from Eternal Warrior, and that's basically, those are the tools that I'm using to do the damage. So as far as the build goes, because there's a lot more to the build than just damage phase, so we've got to survive capturing the totems. We've got to survive the turrets. We've got to survive the Ravagers, all kinds of stuff in the first encounter of Warlord's Ruin. So the build is, it's a hybrid between damage and survivability. So because we're using a Void Super, it means that we can get a Void Overshield when we pick up orbs, which, it may pale in comparison to some, picking up an orb for like Restoration or Woven Mail, but it is essentially a source of healing, quasi-healing damage resistance, right? You get a chunk of Overshield, which is like a chunk of healing. It's basically the same thing. And then while you have an Overshield, I think there's some actual artifact mods. While you have an Overshield, oh right, it's Shield Crush, but I'm not using it. So if I was using Shield Crush, then I can get extra melee energy while I have an Overshield, but that doesn't really matter. I have 3 Frenzied Blades, if you notice here in my loadout. That, having 3 of these means that I don't really need a lot of melee regen. I just make sure that I save my at least 1 or 2 Frenzied Blades for damage phase, so I can sever the boss. But yeah, so I'm using Twilight Arsenal with Facet of Purpose, so this is going to allow me to get those overshields when I pick up Orbs of Power. And I'm using Facet of Protection so that I get damage resistance while surrounded. I believe it's a 25% damage resist, which is pretty good. Also, when I get melee kills, even though I am using Knockout, right? So Knockout is going to give you basically like Cure. You're just going to get a static chunk of healing on your melee kills. But you're also going to regen health with Facet of Blessing. So this is kind of like when... it's kind of like pairing Restoration with Cure, right? Knockout and Blessing, right? Because you're getting just a chunk from Knockout, and then you're getting healing over time from Blessing, right? So I don't normally use this fragment but for this situation, Prismatic Titan is definitely not the most survivable Titan subclass by far, right? I mean, you want to place 100% pure survivability, you're going to go with Banner of War Titan with Woven Mail, or you're going to go like Lorelei Splendor or Solar Titan, right, with Sol Invictus. So Prismatic definitely needs a little bit of help for health regen, so you're going to have to pay attention to your Super, Solitude, maybe even Blessing, like I'm saying. Well, I'm recommending it for this situation that you use it with Knockout. Yeah, so that's our survivability there. And then the other fragments that I'm using here, so Courage and Dawn are playing into my damage, right? So Facet of Courage is going to allow me to get 10% more damage on my light abilities. So my Twilight Arsenal, right? So my axes can do 10% more damage as long as I can apply a darkness debuff to the enemy, which I am doing with Frenzied Blade, right? And while I do that, melee hits will make me radiant, right? So the strategy here is sever the boss. So the boss is doing 40% less damage to me. So it's essentially giving me 40% damage resistance. The boss is also debuffed by a darkness debuff, so it means that my light abilities are doing 10% more damage, and then my weapons are getting 10% more damage from being radiant, right? So that's the setup there as far as the fragments. And I didn't run consecration here because there's a couple issues with consecration. Even though it is amazing for ad clear and even boss damage, I mean, we're not using Syntheseps, this isn't a melee build, right? If it was, then I would of course use consecration, but I want to make sure that I'm not annihilating all of the enemies around the boss when it comes time to do damage with consecration, because if I do that, then I won't be able to proc surrounded on my sword, right? So instead, I'm going with Diamond Lance here for crowd control, which is essentially more survivability. Right, I could just freeze enemies around me. It's very easy to make Diamond Lances, so it's kind of just like having unlimited crowd control at your disposal, right? And then Glacial Grenade here is actually to give me a barricade because I want to use thruster dodge. Normally on Titan, it's really good to use like Towering Barricade to capture the totems right before damage phase, especially if you're a little bit squishy, like if you're not on Banner of War or Solar Titan, then you're going to use that barricade to protect yourself while you're a sitting duck on the totems. But instead, you can just use a glacial grenade as a wall. I don't need my grenade for anything else. I don't need it to debuff the boss because Twilight Arsenal is doing that. I don't need it for ad clear because I'm just using my weapons for ad clear, and I've got 3 frenzy blades as well as ergo sum with the wave frame is very good as well. So having glacial grenade to to substitute in for a tower and barricade is good, because then I can use thruster dodge. And thruster dodge being on such a fast cooldown, it means that I could spam it for not only evasion to get out of sticky situations, but I can also spam it for powerful attraction to scoop up orbs of power, and healing, and proc Reaper more often so that I can make more orbs of power. So I'm a huge fan of thruster dodge, so that's what I went with there. Now, as far as the other weapons, you're going to need, ideally, for Rathil, I like to use, because there's a lot of shielded raiders, I like to use an anti-barrier weapon, right? So for the seasonal artifact, we've got anti-barrier SMGs and pulses, and because this is a very close quarters fight, pulse rifle is not necessarily ideal, so I'm going for a SMG, and because ergo sum is taking up my energy slot, it means that I basically have to go with a strand or a stasis SMG, so that I can actually build up transcendence, right? Because that's another part, is we need to make sure before every damage phase that we have our super, we have our Feast of Light times 6, and we have transcendence. And the only way that you can get transcendence is if you get dark based kills and light based kills to build up that meter, right? So obviously I think we all know this by now, and maybe I'm flexing a little bit here because I've got an adept imminence from doing the Salvation Zed Master Challenge this past week in the 3rd encounter, so I thought that was pretty cool. I actually didn't really get the role that I wanted, Chaos Reshaped or whatever the perk is. It's like Frenzy but better, and it heals you every now and then. But this is good for ad clear with demo and hatchling. Not that I'm spamming grenades, and not that I'm on the strand subclass to really benefit from like Threat of Evolution, but still just a generic good SMG to use. And more importantly, it can pierce all the raiders' shields, and it allows me to shoot the turrets, right, while I'm up in the cage. So that's basically it for the weapons. See if I got anything in mods that are noteworthy here. Also, a couple things in the seasonal artifact. I'll get back to the mods in a sec. Obviously, we want to use Argent Blade, so this is another great thing about Eternal Warrior, is that because we're getting the damage buff from Eternal Warrior, means that our armor charge can actually be free to use perks like this, like Argent Blade, right? So not only could I use like Healthy Finisher to get some healing, I can also stack up the armor charge just so that I get more sword damage. And I don't know exactly how much sword damage this is. I think it's maybe 10%. And then having blade stamina is great for ergo sum, because it means I could do a bunch of ad clear, right? Because basically I'm alternating my ad clear between imminence, my strand SMG for my darkness meter on my transcendence, and then ergo sum for the light bar on my transcendence. And so it means you can really spam a lot of ergo sum and do a lot of ad clear with it and just get ammo back for basically free. Overload sword here, I highly recommend that you go with it, because this is essentially another 25% damage resistance, right? Any enemies that you apply overload to, so namely Rathil, the boss, so not only are we severing the boss, but we're also getting 25% extra resistance from overloading Rathil, right? I think that's how it works. So it definitely doesn't hurt to use it, right? Yeah, so that's, and then radiant orbs as well. So like having radiant on prismatic, you don't get the full long timer that you would using like Ember of Solace and Empyrean on the solar subclass. I think you only get five seconds or something like that from prismatic. So picking up some orbs is just an extra way to get radiant every now and then. So combat mods, Strand Siphon, Void Siphon, so that we can build up our super fast, so we can build up Transcendence fast. not Transcendence, sorry, just Feast of Light, right? We want to get 6 orbs before we go into every damage phase. Void Dexterity, because obviously we don't need to reload Void weapons. They're swords, so we just need to be able to pull them out fast and stow them fast so we can get back to our SMG. And then having a Strand Loader is kind of nice because Imminence has a fairly slow reload. Means of creating Orbs of Power here, I've got Heavy-Handed, and I've got Reaper, right? And then I've got my weapons. So no matter what weapon I'm using, I'm creating orbs on multi-kills, and then my melee is giving me orbs, and kills after I dodge give me orbs. So there's actually a little strategy here that I'll show you in one of the clips on how to basically make 4 orbs of power right off the first spawn of enemies in the encounter. So that you don't have to worry about, you know, taking a long time to build up your Feast of Light. Damage resist here, I went with concussive and melee because obviously being a sword build, we're in close range to the boss, we're getting stomped. There's a lot of enemies within melee distance, right? So it's not just melee hits, it's melee, any type of damage that's within melee range. It doesn't matter if it's actually a melee type of damage. So extra damage resist there. And then solar because the boss is doing solar. So, I mean, you could go double solar. It's really up to you. It's just this is what I went with. And then recuperation for extra survivability because we could spam thruster dodge and powerful attraction, scoop up the orbs, help keep us alive, right? And then healthy finisher is just, I mean, yeah, if I'm about to die and there's a finishable enemy, hey, why not? It's just, you know, free healing, right? But otherwise you can just go with outreach or bomber or whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. So that's basically it for the build. So next I'll go into the clips and I'll explain. Alright, so we want to make sure that we get our Feast of Light times 6 and our Transcendence built up before we go into damage. So we want to do this without skipping many totem phases, right? So Reaper, we just proc Reaper, so first kill makes an orb, second kill makes an orb from Strand Siphon, third kill from melee, from our heavy-handed, makes another orb. Now Void Siphon is going to make us an orb, right? So now we've got Feast of Light times 4, we're almost built up to 6, and finally Feast of Light times 4 is showing on the screen because we still have too many buffs visible, right? So now we just need to make sure that we focus on getting our darkness and light kills. So now I'm going to get a light kill with ergo sum, basically built up, filled up the dark meter just from shattering that glacial grenade, right? And the few strand weapon kills that I got. Now ergo sum is going to do the rest, and so we're transcendent, ready to go for damage. Alright, so as you can see, now I've got Feast of Light times 6, I've got Transcendence, so this means that the next time I go up in the lift, when I come out, I am going to be going for damage, right? As long as the totems are close enough together where I'm sure that I can capture both of them, then I will go for it because I don't want to waste my time if I've only got one totem captured, right? So maybe I'll get lucky and they'll overlap, but maybe I won't. We'll have to see. But basically what I have going on in my head is when I come out of here, I'm going to go for a totem, I'm going to throw a glacial grenade down for a wall of protection, pop Transcendence early so I can help me survive. Forgot to throw my glacial grenade first, pop Transcendence a little bit too early, but the totems aren't too far apart. I think we can capture both of them, so this is alright. Also the boss is in the middle of the map, so it means that we'll probably be able to proc Surrounded on Falling Guillotine, so this is ideal. First thing I'm going to do is sever the boss for damage resistance, apply a darkness debuff, become Radiant, throw my axes at Feast of Light times 6. Now Eternal Warrior is going to give us void damage, ergo sum to proc Wolfpack rounds, then we're straight into Falling Guillotine. I'm going to do all light attacks, and I'm going to try and finish with one heavy attack, but there's no timer on the screen, so I'm not sure. Yeah, we could have optimized a little bit there. We probably could have got a good 3 million for a little over half. Anyways, hope you enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one.